what's going on, beautiful jellyfish? It's Tracy. Thank you so much for taking a little bit of time today to hang out with me. I really appreciate it. And in today's video, we're going to be chatting about the EDH Power Levels. And basically, I do have the cats in here with me, so if you hear like crinkly noises, Zelda's in her tunnel, which crinkles, and Leia is in her bag. It's like an old Cheesecake Factory bag that we cut out the handles, and it's like her favorite spot to be. She like naps in it. She's like chilling right now. It's like one of her favorite spots. So anyways, if you hear noises, that is what that is. But the other alternative is that I kick them out and then they like cry hysterically at my door. So it's like, you know what I mean? Just let them be. They're vibing and thriving, living their best cat lives. Anyways, we're going to be chatting about the EDH Power Levels, and I've been wanting to film this video for a really long time. I think I just didn't know quite exactly how to frame it or what how to say or what I really wanted to say or whatever. And this isn't going to be so much like this is what a 1 looks like. I mean, we'll be talking about that like a little bit, but yeah, that's kind of where I feel like I kind of want to start this video. I think we want to chat a little bit about like how I would sort of like define the power level. And again, these are very like loose, like my own personal interpretations of these sorts of things, and I kind of want to do this as like a general kind of like my view of it and whatnot. This is not like a definitive like I am the person who is like reporting this statistical info, like I have this credibility or anything like that. That's not really what this is, but this is kind of like in my own experience what this kind of looks like. And I would say like maybe I'd put like a 1 and a 2. So this would be on a scale of like 1 to 10. I would say 1 to 2, I would say is roughly maybe like you've put together some commons and uncommons that you've already have. You maybe haven't really invested in like commander staples or anything like that. And you've kind of just put together from cards that you maybe already own. And I would say maybe 3 or 4 is where I'd put some precons. Now, here's what I will say is that's kind of like a hard thing to judge because like there are precons that are extremely powerful, but I would say your run-of-the-mill average precon is there. And I would say 5 is where I'd say it starts to get pretty, not like intense, but like pretty like you've put investments into your commander deck. Like you've put in some staples. I'd put maybe 5 or 6 around there. If you've seen any of my deck techs that I've posted on this channel, I would maybe say like my Merfolk deck or my zombie deck, I would say maybe is around in that power level. 7 and 8, I would say, is where it kind of gets really like you've invested quite a lot in your commander deck. You're running those commander staples. Your deck is pretty consistent. Your early game is looking really good. You're spending your early game kind of like ramping out and stuff like that, and you've just put a lot more money into your deck, and there's a lot of synergies and things like that. And then I would say like 9 and 10 is like kind of bridging that like CEDH gap where your deck is just incredibly powerful and you're doing really powerful things at the early stages of the game. You're doing things that maybe are very oppressive, very powerful. Yeah. And that's kind of where I would say I sit. At least that's where I feel right now. My interpretation of this might change. That's just where I feel like I'm sitting right now and where I would do. If you've watched any of my deck techs, I would say the maximum power level my personal commander decks go up to, my interpretation is around a 7. I feel like my Tasigur deck, my Avacyn deck, and my Omnath deck are all around the same power level, and I would say I do really powerful things. I do have infinite combos in a couple of my commander decks. I actually took it out of Tasigur, so I don't have it in Tasigur, but Tasigur is just very good and has answers to a lot of things, and the recursion is really great in that deck. I still think that my most powerful deck is my Omnath deck just because of how quickly I can get out stuff and the resilience of that deck, where if my stuff dies, you know, it's just very good. But that's kind of my own personal interpretation for my commander decks, and I'm just using that for frame of reference in case you've seen any of my deck techs and you were kind of just curious about where I feel like I sit. I will never get into the... I feel like the way that my decks sit right now is probably, I won't really get a lot more powerful than that. I am working right now, and I have talked about this in a couple of videos, that I am working to get my decks that are maybe at like a 5, trying to bump them up to a 6, just to get a little bit more in the powerful realm. But yeah, we're not quite there yet with things, and I'll probably do an EDH updates video when I talk about that. And you guys will probably see in an upcoming haul a couple cards that I get that will make my decks good. And so now I kind of want to talk about why it's important to have a power level scale and why it's helpful for not only you but for your opponents as well. So in my opinion, one of the worst case scenarios is I sit down and play a game of Commander with someone I don't know, and I say, this is about where I'm putting my Commander deck at number-wise, and then someone plays something that's not the same, and they completely stomp myself or maybe other people on the table because that message wasn't correctly communicated where that deck sits. Now, that's not to say that this does not happen where it's done innocently. Like, I like to think the best of people, and I do think that there are people who, malicious feels like it's too harsh of a word here, but honestly, maybe it does work where someone is like knowingly stomps on you and knows that their deck is not at the same level as the number or the vibe that you say, because I think to sit down and say, hey guys, I'm playing a 3. Again, I have an interpretation of what a 3 looks like, and it might look different from yours, but I think if you're able to say, this is how much money I've invested in the deck, or these are the cards these are the staples that I have. I actually love when people do that, where they'll say, I have a handful of staples. I have a card like Mana Crypt in my deck or something like that. I think that gives me a really great idea of where my opponents are at. Another really helpful thing that I've also found to do is if you play a game of Commander, as I'll say, okay, are we going up? Are we going down? Or are we staying at the same level? This is incredibly important because maybe you struggle in the first game to get a definitive, like, fine line where all of you guys are playing at. But if you're then able to look and reflect at that game and say, okay, where are we going from here? That is incredibly helpful. If you're struggling with this system, I would really recommend playing a game and then saying, okay, this is where I'm at. I also think it's really important to talk to other people about where they think your decks are at. And the reason I feel this way is because I've never really felt this way about one of my decks before, except for my Merfolk deck, is Paul thinks my Merfolk deck is just much better than I personally think that deck is. And so, like, I find with that deck, it's so funny because I actually played it the other day and I actually won, which doesn't happen a lot with that deck. I was just kind of left alone, and I'm pretty sure I won that game. And I just did, like, a ton of really great things. And I just popped off. I went off. People left me alone. I was able to do my thing. I was able to just draw a ton of different cards. And I had a really great time. And so Paul and I can never really agree on where that he thinks that deck sits, which I just think is so interesting. But anyways, so you know, that deck's really interesting because it's one of those decks where, like, if I'm left alone, I'm kind of able to do a lot of really powerful things. And I do have, you know, some interventions where I'm able to stop my opponents and I'm able to do that. But anyways, it's funny because he's always like, I think that deck is like this. And I'm like, no, I don't feel like that, to be honest with you, at all. But anyways, so I think it's really important to do that and to talk about that. And don't try to get to an even spot where you're all playing around the same level, because you don't want to feel like, I feel bad if I sit down and my deck was not quite at the same level as I feel like my opponents were doing. And I also think too, and this kind of segues into the other point when I was kind of talking earlier about the levels, is like a lot of people think that when you have a deck that's like a 4, for example, your deck's not good or your deck's not powerful or you haven't invested in your deck, which like isn't true. Like I feel like this happens so much where, like, when someone's like, oh, I have a budget deck, or they're like, oh, I have my deck's a 4, like, that people think that it's not good, and that's just not true. What I think that more so means is that maybe you haven't invested the money in, like, the pieces for that deck. The other thing I also just want to say, and my friend Logan said this, and I thought this was, like, really a powerful thing that he said, is he was like, well, like, because we were playing a game and he was like, I feel like I've capped out at this deck being the most powerful that it is. Like, I don't think anything I could really do could make this deck more powerful. I think I've kind of capped it out where it is. And I think you could do this in 2 ways. I think the one way is you could be like, no, I literally think, like, I can't do anything to make this deck better. The other thing, too, is you could just not want to do that. And that is okay. I personally think the best way to build commander decks, or to have your variety of decks, is to build them in different power levels. Because you never know when you're going to be sitting down with someone new, or someone is, or like one of your friends builds something and they're like, yo, I just threw this jank together. It's not very good. Let's just see how it happens. And then you just sit down and play. And I just think that's so incredibly cool when like you're all kind of at different levels, and where you kind of have decks that are at different levels, and you like just can play a variety of different things, because the reality is like I can only play so many more powerful level games where I'm like, I need a break, like I just need to do something different, and then I'm like, can we just go down please, and then we like do something that's, you know, definitely down on that power level. And I think that's so incredibly fun. But yeah, I think that it's really great to build a commander decks in a variety of different ways. I also think too, like one of the best things for me to do is like when you're building a deck is to ask yourself, where do I want this deck to sit? Where do I want it to be in relation to its other things? And again, even if you can't give a number, even if you're like, I have this deck and I want it to be around the same power level as this deck, I think that's super cool. One thing I've actually found with a lot of decks that I've built is I've actually found that the decks that I've have at the higher power levels, it took me some time to get there. I didn't right from the get-go just build my Avacyn deck as a great example, and that deck was always really powerful. And I feel like a lot of times some people see a commander and they think like, oh, this is where it sits or whatever like that, and sometimes that just isn't necessarily the best judge of what, you know, your deck is power leveled at, which is why I think it's important to say, I'm playing this is where it sits. And so, yeah, I think like Avacyn really struggled a lot in the beginning because I had so many higher CMC Angels and the ramp just wasn't there in that deck. And it took me a while to get there, and I still don't have everything I would love to make that deck even more powerful. I'm definitely, you know, looking to get a couple of those pieces. But, yeah, so yeah, that was kind of it for where I really kind of wanted to chat up with you guys about the EDH power levels. I'd really like to know what, you know, how you guys feel about this, and what, you know, where you guys are kind of at, and like with your commander decks and the people that you play with and stuff like that. When you guys sit down, do you kind of, you know, say this is where I'm at? I think that's kind of the interesting thing about like playing commander compared to like, for example, modern or like standard or whatever, is you kind of go into that and it's kind of the competitiveness is there, and EDH doesn't necessarily have that unless you're playing CEDH. But like, I don't talk about CEDH on my channel. Like, I don't play CEDH and I have zero intentions of ever getting into CEDH, which is why actually at my game store, they have like an FNM, but it literally, the whole thing is you play your most powerful deck and you're trying to win. And that to me is like, I don't want to do that. Like, I just want to have fun. And I don't really feel like I'm having fun. Not that I don't have fun when I'm doing powerful things, like I do, but I don't want to get to that level where it's oppressive. And I think that's like a really big thing with CEDH, is it's either like a combo of like oppressive and like winning really, really, really quickly. And I just don't feel like I have the level to do that. Like, in the sense of, I don't know how I would do that, and I just don't really have a desire to do that. So yeah, guys, that is everything for talking about these power levels. I'd really like to know what you guys think in a comment below. If you enjoyed this video, go ahead and give it a thumbs up, subscribe to our channel if you're not already, and I'll catch you in my next one.